Welcome to the Influent podcast, developing leadership, building success, and influencing society. For more resources, visit us online at InfluentLIVE.
Hi, Bob Frazier with InfluentLIVE. Welcome back to our show. We have a very fun guest today. This is a guest who is a secular consultant, but he actually brings the gospel in through work. And this is so cool. Can we actually disciple the world with our secular jobs? So welcome here to Abraham Jin.
Yes.
So good to have you. And of course, our beautiful Kelly Dennewick.
Hello.
And, it is so exciting. So many Christians, this idea of, it's either ministry or the work, and you've got to choose kind of whether you serve God or you serve the system, right? And the cool thing is you're actually able to bring your own personal faith through your work. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. I think I've always wrestled with living in two different cultures.
Yeah.
I think just being a Korean American, always living in a family where I had to be acting a certain way and having certain values, and then living in a different culture out there. And then as I've been navigating in various different worlds and different organizations, what I found at the end of the day, a big part of just who you are needs to be displayed out into the world, because people really care about authenticity. And I think a big part for me, as I live out and do the work that I do in regards to leadership consultant, I found that you have to live authentically from the inside out, and that's a big
Which
part
means
of it.
practicing your faith and not being afraid to be who you really are, which is a believer, but you're also professional.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
So you actually work for a secular consulting business, right? And you go in and basically help revamp companies.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? And so tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. Well, a lot of times people invite us to actually work with our teams and organizations, but we inevitably work with each of the leaders.
Of course.
And then so, especially if we go through the top-down perspective, you have to deal with the upper leadership first,
Right.
and then it starts to trickle in. As we actually engage the leaders, we talk about real-life work issues and teams, but inevitably it goes into their self-leadership. And in your self-leadership, you have to talk about your emotions, your relationships. That even sometimes goes into your family relationships.
Wow.
Because how your leadership
gets personal.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
of course.
So as you lead there, that everything that you lead in that context flows into every other context.
Of course. You can't separate who you are from your work, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So naturally, personal things come up.
Yeah.
And so you actually are able to what?
So we engage in the holistic way. And so if it goes into spiritual conversation, we go there. If it goes to emotional things, we go there. And I'll give you an example. There was a person that I was actually coaching. And in that engagement, he said, I want to be more confident in the workplace. There was this lack of security that he had, and he noticed that he needed to grow in greater confidence in his leadership, in his space. And what we found as we started to go on a deep dive with him, he started to talk about his life. And I noticed that he had a very negative filter in which he engaged and how he gave a commentary over his relationships, which is really fascinating for me, because as I understood his hardwiring, what he is made for and how he's supposed to function, he would actually relate it with more of a positive manner, but it was very negative. So I was like, hey, where does all this negativity and your ability to kind of criticize your relationships come from? And he goes, actually, it comes from my family. It's like, well, tell me more about that. Talks about how his dad was dominating him, and it was just very critical, and he never measured up. And so there we ended up talking about daddy issue stuff, right?
Wow.
And we started then going to this aspect of how his hold over his dad in regards to this bitterness that he had and this insecurity and just this longing to be affirmed had everything to do with things at his workplace. So the first time I went deep dive with him, I was able to sit down and say, you know what? On behalf of your father, can I ask for forgiveness?
I mean, it was a little bit of healing for his background, and I mean, you're bringing healing into his family and his person. Right?
Yeah.
and that changes the business,
Absolutely.
That's right.
right?
Yeah.
So,
Can I just touch upon this? Because in the church world, we learn about inner healing and going to God and working through these dynamics personally of what block us, so to speak. But I love that you are translating this out of some Christianese that an everyday person who may not know God, you're serving them by just still hitting the issues, and you're still bringing light. You know, God is with us, and just by bringing light and addressing the issue and bringing the kingdom, the values of forgiveness, and, you know, bringing what you're doing, you are bringing Isaiah 61 deliverance into the workplace without people even realizing it. So I love how, you know, so many believers keep that to the church world. And what I love, I think you are a revolutionary in
you're debubbling.
yeah, because you are bringing it straight into the work world. So that's amazing.
And it's very fruitful because you see that, I mean,
Our stuff works.
Yeah, can forgiveness be actually a positive value in culture building and leadership development of people? Because if you're holding all of this toxic bitterness
energy,
or unforgiveness and all these things that hold deep inside of you, that has everything to do with how you relate to people outside of it.
The gospel is holistic.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right? I mean, our stuff works. If you do the gospel, your finances start to work. Your marriage starts to work. Your family starts to work. Your business starts to work. Your business relationships start to work, right? So the gospel is holistic. We I think fail to give the gospel its full credit where we think it's, you know, we call it the gospel of salvation.
Yeah.
But that's different than the gospel of the kingdom.
Yeah.
Right? And it's a holistic message where you're bringing in the value system of God. Now, you actually were a pastor and you started in ministry as a missionary, right? I mean, you did some of this.
Yeah.
So you basically, I mean, you probably thought you were called as a minister, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it was interesting for me because I'll be leading people through forgiveness. I would do inner healing. I would share the message of God and how it actually can change and transform them. But I find that it was only focusing on building the church, and it wasn't really necessarily always translating into every sector. And so for me, I found that there's so many principles of the gospel and the kingdom and the truth of
If
God's
it works
word.
for the church, can it work everywhere?
Absolutely, yeah.
And so that's kind of your journey.
Yeah.
And so tell me about your transition. I mean, what caused you to want to kind of, just get it out of the bubble, you know, bring the kingdom out of the bubble, so to speak, you know? And tell me, be honest, was it tough? Did you feel like, oh gosh, I'm going to go into the secular world and I'm really not going to do anything for Jesus? I'm kind of lay the ministry down or whatever. How did it feel?
I think for me, it was a battle at times where I was like, okay, how do I actually do it where it doesn't offend people? But at the same time, I still want to be an agent of light where I'm actually bringing change. And so just to navigate that, and I think a big part of that is how do you actually portray it? What's the packaging? Do you actually share it? Because a lot of times people have an offense towards the way that you communicate it.
Sure.
And so there's certain vocabulary that we often use that actually can offend people and has certain baggages. So I'm very careful what I use and how I actually communicate.
Give us some examples.
Let's say, Jesus, right? That word has a lot of baggages, right? But how would you talk about his kingdom culture without actually saying his name, right? And so one of the ways that we actually, I believe, can be a powerful way is defining who he is, you know, so grace and truth, right? If you actually talk about what grace is and what truth is, and both of those dynamics, then you're able to really paint a picture of what true leadership looks like, right? And so, and even with the word grace, if you can use other words like love, what is compassion?
Not a lot of people object to love.
Yeah.
Or grace.
Yeah.
Or truth.
Yeah.
Right? People don't have any problem with those words, but those are other words for Jesus.
Yeah.
Right? He is capital T.
Yeah.
Right? He's capital G, grace. Right?
He's the embodiment of those things.
He is those things, for sure. So bringing those things in.
And when you encounter those things, you're actually encountering him.
That's right.
Yeah.
So when you decided to kind of go into the secular consulting business, did you feel like you were giving up on the gospel or giving up on, the calling of God or the ministry calling?
No, for me, I've always had this message where everyone is a minister. Everyone is supposed to be a light. Everyone is supposed to be
wherever you are, whatever you do.
Yeah, and so for me, I realized that it wasn't. I had to explain to other people that I wasn't moving away from that I actually am still engaged.
So you didn't have a problem, but other people were like, wait a minute.
Well, yeah, because I believe people divorce it and say that, you're doing this and you're in this kind of holy huddle and you're doing this religious thing, and then now you're doing the marketplace thing. But I feel like that language in itself kind of separates us.
It's not helpful, is it?
It's not helpful. No.
There is no separation.
Yeah.
Right. This is where we've really lost something. Yeah. I think in our gospel, because I think in some ways our gospel has become kind of a Greek gospel, which has this idea of the separation of the spiritual and the natural. Where the Hebrew gospel, right? If you plant seed and you have a good crop, God blessed you, right? If you had a new invention, God blessed you,
absolutely,
right? If you go in and study and get a Nobel Prize, well, that's the Lord is helping you. The Lord is blessed. So there's no separation in the Jewish culture from from what we do and how we the way we contribute to the world and God's view, right? The system and the spirit are not separated. Yeah. They're all integrated. So I think we've lost something.
Yeah. I think the identity of being a kingdom of priests. This kingly ability to go into to wherever you are, and you're actually ruling and reigning, taking dominion. And then the priests, you actually bring the presence of God. You bring the values of God. You bring the nearness of Him wherever you are. But I feel like we've actually kind of broke that kingdom of priest identity, and we just separated that and put that in isolation to one another. But I really believe it's that duality that comes together that I really believe that we are to walk in.
Wait a minute. We're both.
We are both.
So are you a priest or are you a king?
We're both.
Come on, man. Come on, man. That's right. Yeah. We are both. We don't have permission to not be priestly.
Yeah.
Right.
And not be connected. We also don't have permission to not be kingly.
Yeah.
And being exercising rulership and authority on the planet. Right? Come on. I mean,
absolutely.
and so that's so much about what I love what you're doing. Now, I think I know a lot of people who are Christians, who are evangelists, and when you talk about bringing the ways of God in, and they don't really like it as much, because if you're not actually talking about Jesus and bringing salvation, it's kind of like it doesn't count, and it's,
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
It's really interesting. If you even look at how even Jesus talks about God, he doesn't even sometimes use all the Christianese that we use. He uses just analogies of the birds and the air. It's just like he uses common symbols and a vernacular that is relatable to the people there.
Right.
And so I think we do a disservice when we only talk in a certain vocabulary that actually creates outsiders and insiders.
Oh.
And so that's what really a big part of culture development is. How do you use language that actually allows you to have influence? Because language is power. Language is actually the first part of actually changing culture. And we got to think about values and culture and language all together, and really be careful how we actually use our language, because that's the magic where you can actually engage people and change them. Yeah.
I loved in our conversation where you said, God's really in the people business. And so you're building people. And, 1 Corinthians where it says one sows the seed and another person waters it. I just see that as what you're doing. You are in the business of building people and building light and truth and the kingdom into them. And so that is salvation. It may not be full on deliverance, as we would call it in the church, but you are a kingdom worker by building people.
Yeah, absolutely.
So your consulting business, this Giant Worldwide, it's a amazing business. Tell us a little bit about Giant.
Yeah, Giant is a people growth strategy. We actually bring in a leadership operating system for companies, and we go work with individuals. We help them from causing leadership sabotage. Sometimes there's people who don't know how they sound on the other side of them. They undermine their influence constantly, right? And they
I got in a
wonder-
lot of trouble in my early days. Yeah, that's how it's hard to believe.
and people wonder why certain patterns are happening in their lives. And well, it's very predictive actually, and we basically have different tools and different ways and where we can actually say, hey, this is who you are. And we shine a mirror on them, and they can see that, and it's really powerful. And because not many people actually do work on self-awareness and know what their strengths and weaknesses are. They kind of fumble into that, but then they don't have very much clarity into it. And then we take that individual understanding and helping them to find their leadership voice, and we say, hey, what does that look like in regards to the team dynamic? And we maximize team performance, and we believe at the end of the day, if you can have deep collaboration, it's going to actually end up with great productivity and ultimately profitability. Yeah.
So you're focusing on leadership and teams.
Yeah.
And leadership related to teams. So actually, I have a little inside information because my wife has actually hired you and just absolutely raves, about what you're doing.
I'm curious what she's talking about.
Just amazing insight into helping her be a better leader and helping her think about her team dynamics. Okay, but here's the really cool thing. I mean, what you're doing when you're teaching people to be a better leader, you're actually teaching them you're teaching gospel principles.
Yeah.
Right? It's in the Bible, right? Forgiveness, culture of honor, right?
Yeah.
Servant leadership. I mean, some of the things that you're talking about, these principles, how to be a better leader, how to communicate better, how to be a better leader, right? It's the gospel value system, right?
Yeah, absolutely. There's when we look at just
So you're actually, by doing your job and getting paid to do your secular job, you're actually bringing the kingdom.
yes, we are. When you're actually bringing human flourishment and actually show what a true human that actually can bring liberation and healing and actually like
Jesus said, I
move
came
in
to
courage.
set people free.
Yeah.
He healed people. He set them free. That's a big part of his job and a big part of what you're doing.
Yes.
Right? You're bringing the value system of God in. And I actually think that we have largely misunderstood the gospel in a lot of ways and the Great Commission. Right? The Great Commission, he said, go into all the nations, teach the gospel, bring the gospel, bring my ways into the earth. He said, teaching them to obey my commandments.
Yeah.
And that's discipling the nations, right? Disciple all the nations, teaching them to obey my commandments.
Yeah.
I would argue that you're actually discipling the nations, right? By bringing his value system and his ways in.
Yeah.
You're actually bringing the gospel in.
Yeah.
And so if a person who is getting a divorce and mean to his wife and doesn't relate to his family actually changes, that's the kingdom, right? If someone who is abusing employees and whatever else, or stops, that's the kingdom,
Yeah.
right? If someone finds love turns from forgiveness to unforgiveness and bitterness to love, that's the kingdom. And that is actually discipleship. Jesus said, teaching them to obey my commandments. Well, what does that mean, to obey his commandments? Well, his commandments is the whole set of his teachings that he taught on the earth.
Yeah.
Right? Love your neighbor, forgiveness, all these things, right? He wants adherence of his ways, not just people who raise their hand and acknowledge him as Lord, which that's step one, and we all want to do that. We certainly want more of that. But no, it's really deeper than that. Discipling is actually transforming the culture, the system, and the people. And I would argue you're doing that. And I would argue you're as a businessman, you're actually doing that. And I believe not only can he do it, and is he doing, but we all can do it.
Yes. And so for us, one of the geniuses that we actually engage in helping to develop people and actually multiply it is we're always looking at the principle of what is simple, scalable, and sustainable. And so we take all these metrics of values into specific language into a visual tool. And that visual tool is allowed to be shared to people. And when you actually see it, it's so easy, because how many of you guys know that when you actually take a book and you synthesize it into a cliff notes of a picture, you can actually remember stuff? A lot of people do. And therefore, right away, people are able to replicate that throughout the organization. So it doesn't become just the executive understanding it, but it could be from the white collar to blue collar, whatever you are in education, we say if a 13-year-old can understand it, then we actually done a good job in making it simple enough for everyone to receive it. So
And changing the culture,
yeah,
bringing the value system in. You know, I mean, one of my favorite stories is John Maxwell, right? Who has written all these leadership books. I mean, literally, I've traveled the world. I've never been in a CEO's office that didn't have one of his books on their bookshelf. And he's a pastor who writes biblical principles, and he's just translated them into secular terminology, which, you know, Jesus translated his words so that they could be understood to the people he was talking with, right? And now it's literally best practices, right? You know, the level 5 leader and the servant leader and all these things, and, you know, is all best practices in business, right? What?
yeah,
I mean, it's the kingdom is best practices.
Yeah.
You know? Does it matter? Does it matter? Kelly, does that matter?
It's amazing. These signs will follow those who believe. So I believe in the tangible favor of God. But miracles, that we can believe for miracles following us as we're implementing kingdom principle, you know, you're talking about just
That's
the
a miracle.
simple
If a kingdom principle
miracle
happens.
of seeing transformation imparted into another life. That is a miracle following you as a worker, as an evangelist, as a pastor, as a teacher, as a prophet and an apostle in the marketplace, as a businessman.
Yeah. It's awesome. I just love this idea of integrating our lives. Right? We're one human. I'm in the financial business, you know, I have a business, but I am also a believer.
yeah,
And I'm a professional. I do my job. I run my business as a professional, but I'm practicing my faith as a believer every moment of every day. You know, and that's and I'm bringing the value system of God in, you know, into my business every day, and salting the culture, right? Leavening the culture. So tell us some stories.
yeah. One of the things that we do is we actually help people distinguish between their nature, nurture, and their choices. And we are able to help them to understand the nuance of why they behave a certain way. As I've been actually working with a chairman of a board one time, and we were sitting eating a steak, I started to just say, hey, in light of who you are, for you to be vulnerable, for you to open up, for you to share all your weaknesses, you have a hard time doing that. And if you want to go to your next level of leadership, to continue to develop trust with the people that you really love and care for, even when you work for, you need to engage in those type of dialogue more.
Transparency.
Transparency, basically. And I said, if you don't develop that, you're going to start to push people away. And he said, you know what, you're right. He ends up saying, you know what, I actually have a tumor right here, and I haven't told my wife yet.
Oh, wow.
And he just ends up just sharing, just spilling his being of all the times that he actually has pushed people away. And for the first time, he felt like, man, I can really share myself.
He could be honest and transparent.
And he ends up sharing, you know what? He goes, are you a religious man? He asks me. I go, yeah, I am. My faith is very strong. I believe in Jesus Christ. And he goes, yeah, you know, my wife, she's a PK. She goes to church.
Preacher's kid?
Preacher's kid, yeah. And I go to worship, but sometimes I can't just be there. It's like, okay, what do you mean you can't just be there? It's like, I don't know, I feel like I have to leave. It's like, and that's in my background, I'm like, okay, there's something happening spiritually or something emotionally happening.
Right?
What's going on? I said, can I ask you why you can't be there? And he goes, I don't know. You know what? I never really thought about this, he said. I just feel like I'm not worth it.
Wow.
And I looked him square in the eyes and I said, you know what? You are never worth it, because he was worth it for you. And right there I had an open opportunity to just share who he is.
Isn't about our
and
works.
the grace of
It's about
God,
grace,
and just not by works, and just really was able to encourage him, you know, and then to be able to pray for him, pray for his tumor,
awesome.
you know, and to be able to go to places that most people can't bring the gospel into, or just can't bring their faith into. And I see it so seamless because he needs that. Because you imagine if you're pushing so many people away and you're trying to be self-sufficient all the time, you know how much stress that is as a leader, and how much release he had just right there, just to be able to talk about those things and bring those things to the light. And at the end, he just, texts me and goes, "Thank you so much. Like I wasn't able to share this with anybody, and so this was before I even cut a deal of a contract. I just kind of just went there because I just felt like it just led to that. It was something that he invited me into. I don't force myself into that place, but if it goes to that direction, I'll go there. I'm not afraid of it. And I genuinely believe that's the best for him, that he needs to talk about those things. He needs to go there.
Of course.
And that there was this condemnation and this guilt that he carried where he felt he was never measured enough. And so because he felt like he was trying to look good all the time, he was pushing people away and he didn't want people to come in. And so I believe that's a huge aha for him as a leader. As he's leading himself differently.
I love that. A personal concept that I carry is that I'm Esther in a business suit, but I go in.
Awesome.
I go in incognito as a spiritual professional, looking like the world, so I can, I do my work just like you. You go into your professional situation where you're meeting with your clients, and then as God opens the door, as that tender spot comes, then you gently follow that and bring truth. And so I love how so many Christians are just gotta preach the gospel, but waiting on God to really open up the opportunities, because the world, it's a dry and a weary land spiritually, and they're wanting truth, but we have to wait for the door of their heart to open first. And so I love how this story just shows being sensitive to the Holy Spirit to allow for the right timing to really be able to bring something that probably marked his life forever, because you partnered with God in that timing and was a friend to him.
I'll say something you probably won't hear from the pulpits. Dial it down at work. And I think it's easier than we make it think, than we think it is, right? To be a light and to share the gospel. And in my first book, Marketplace Christianity, I wrote one of the most powerful ways to share the gospel and is to share your personal faith, but it's after praying for someone's needs. So the idea is this, that build a real friendship. Yeah. Like you did with this gentleman. An authentic, real friendship. And inevitably, when you build a real friendship, they will tell you their woes. Right? Friends share their issues. Yeah. Right? So somebody says, "Gosh, had a bad day with my wife, or we're not doing that good. I don't know if it's going to work." I mean, wow, that's friendship. When somebody shares at that level, that's friendship. Well, now what do? Well, be a friend. Yeah. And now, as you said, you go in with the Holy Spirit. You said, "Lord, should I pray for them? How should I pray? Should I pray that things get healed? Should I pray for better understanding? What should I pray? Just, how do I pray privately for them? Should I ask them to pray?" It's all okay, whatever, right? And you pray for them, as a friend, or, privately, or just give them wisdom or advice privately, but it's easier than we think. And then as they ask about your faith, you simply share your testimony. You share your own, who Jesus is to you personally. You don't have to have some big formal gospel presentation. It's really very, very simple, right? And I think we've totally, missed the simplicity of the gospel, which is a life transformed, right? And, I can only share about what I personally experienced, right? So share what you personally experienced. Yeah. But just praying for people's needs, it's really so simple. I hear people, you've built a wonderful business where you build relationships with people. And as a normal part of that, people are going to share their personal issues and challenges. And it's an opportunity to bring healing, the gospel, etc. Yeah. It's so powerful. Yeah. Everyone can do this. Yeah. Come on, man! Yes. You're awesome. You guys, this is so cool. This is so cool.
Do we have time for another story?
Okay, go ahead.
There was a CEO I knew, and she shares with me how she engages in lots of different conversations. I said, "Hey, I knew right away just the way that she was gifted. She had this innate ability to pick up people's energy or vibes or spiritual presence. And I said, "Hey, do you know how to actually shelve that? Do you know how to disconnect from that? Because sometimes that could be overwhelming." She goes, "How do you know that? How do you know that about me?" It's like, well, it's just naturally in your gift set, you can see that is a common expression or a common issue that you could actually deal with. And so I said, and she ends up going, no, I don't know how to do that. So I said, hey, close your eyes. Say, I want you to picture all the different people that you're connected with. And they may be actually connected with a rope or some type of chain. And basically end up leading her into some type of listening prayer where she's able to give those relationships to the liberator, the person that is the most freeing person, right? For her, it was her dad that she gave it to. But it came to the point where she said, you know what? I think the greatest liberator for me is, she ends up sharing, I'm a believer as well. So she ends up going, hey, I haven't been praying for a long time. She ends up going, can I give this to him? I was like, absolutely, can you do that? And so right there, where she hasn't been engaged in church for like maybe a couple months because of various different reasons, she's able to experience that type of freedom right there.
Yeah.
Where she's able to give away and disconnect and really be able to recalibrate herself.
Yeah.
And that's a huge thing as a leader. If there's a lot of clutter in their mind, in their heart, in their spirit, it could really affect them from really being able to fully engage. Because literally she would sometimes isolate herself to certain conversations, certain people, because she couldn't really be able to give, couldn't be able to listen.
Wow.
And so, yeah.
That's awesome.
You're the catalyst.
Yeah.
So we're out of time, but what would you say to our viewers?
I really believe that you can live out your faith in every context. You don't have to do that just in the workplace, but it can be the littlest thing of just sharing love, truth, showing the values that you carry, and being able to, when its opportunity arises and they ask you where is this coming from, that you can actually really share your faith, share your journey of why you actually live the way that you do.
And it works.
It works.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. So awesome. It's so awesome to have you here, Abraham. And
Wow.
we'll see you next time. Influent Live. God bless you.